The ring should have felt solid in Eric's hand, a symbol of certainty, a promise he'd rehearsed with confidence. But as he stood at the altar inside the grand Georgia church, sunlight pouring through stained glass windows in soft bands of color, the simple band felt strangely cold. Too cold. His thumb trembled against the metal, a tiny movement no one else could see, but one that rattled him from the inside. Guests filled the pews in neat rows, smiling in that warm southern way, whispering blessings and quiet predictions about the beautiful future ahead. The organ hummed softly through the air, a gentle wave that usually soothed him. Today it only made him aware of his heartbeat tapping unevenly beneath his suit. Charlotte stepped forward at the far end of the aisle, framed in white, glowing from the afternoon light behind her. Every step she took should have steadied Eric. Instead, something inside him shifted, a small, sharp movement beneath the surface, the kind a man tries to ignore. He tried to breathe past it, tried to smile for her, tried to hold on to the moment everyone else believed was flawless, but the crack inside him widened. He adjusted the ring again, pretending to steady it, but his hand continued to shake. His throat tightened, not from hesitation, no, not quite, but from a disturbance he couldn't name. It was like a forgotten memory brushing against the inside of his chest. Charlotte didn't notice yet. She was focused on reaching him, on stepping into their future. Her dress swayed softly with each step, catching the wind from the open side windows where the scent of jasmine drifted in. The church seemed peaceful, reverent, filled with love. But inside Eric, something else stirred. He blinked slowly, grounding himself in the glowing faces around him. Old family friends, colleagues and neighbors who had shown up for the fairy tale moment. The officiant gave him a reassuring nod, as if everything was unfolding exactly as it should. It should have been perfect. But his fingers wouldn't stop trembling. A single thought pressed into his mind, uninvited and relentless. Why do I feel like something is coming? The organ climbed to a richer note. Charlotte reached the halfway point. Someone sniffled happily. A young girl tossed a few petals near her feet. And yet, something in the air felt off to Eric, like the room held its breath just a second too long. He swallowed hard, trying to steady himself, trying to stay present, trying to be the man everyone expected him to be in this moment. But he wasn't imagining it. Something inside him had already cracked open. He took a quiet step backward before he realized he'd done it. Not enough for anyone to gasp, but enough for his own heart to notice the shift. A whisper of unease wrapped around him as he forced a smile at Charlotte, a smile he hoped she wouldn't examine too closely. This wasn't cold feet. It wasn't doubt about her. It was something deeper, older, something that had been waiting for the right moment to make itself known. And now, it was awake. The organ softened. Charlotte lifted her eyes toward him with a hopeful expression. She had no idea that the man waiting for her had just felt his world tilt ever so slightly. No one in the church noticed the crack forming inside him, but Eric did, and it terrified him. The moment Charlotte stepped onto the final stretch of the aisle, the organ softened into a gentle hum, allowing the hush of the church to settle around them again. Eric felt it, that faint disturbance in his chest swelling into a tight pull, as if something inside him recognized a truth he wasn't ready to face. Just as the officiant inhaled to continue, a small vibration buzzed against Eric's leg, a tiny sound, barely noticeable, but it struck through him like a spark dropped on dry leaves. He froze. His hand slipped instinctively toward his pocket, fingers brushing his phone as if hoping he'd imagined it. But the screen lit up, and the glow reflected off his palm like a flare in the quiet church. Grace, her name, clear as day, sitting there like a message from a part of his life he'd never fully buried. His chest tightened instantly. His breath stuttered. And for the first time in minutes, the trembling in his hand made perfect sense. He turned the phone slightly, the light catching the edges of the stained glass colors on his skin. The world around him dimmed. The guests vanished into a blur. The warmth in the church felt suddenly distant. Why now? Why her? Why does my heart still react like this? He didn't say the words out loud. He couldn't. But they stormed through him, scattering every carefully rehearsed vow he had prepared. Charlotte smiled warmly as she approached, unaware, untouched by the sudden shift happening just feet away from her. She was expecting a perfect moment, a steady man, a beginning. She saw none of the chaos flickering across Eric's eyes. The officiant continued speaking, but his voice felt far away, as though coming from underwater. The camera of life seemed to zoom inward on Eric's expression, narrowing the world to his eyes, his stunned breath, his clenched jaw. This was the moment the normal broke, a vow interrupted by a vibrating phone. The kind of interruption no groom expects at the altar. The shock, guilt, and hidden attachment burst through him all at once, even if he fought to keep his face still. Everyone has had a moment when the past shows up at the exact worst time, reminding them of choices they thought they left behind. Grace is calling, but why? What does she want? What does she need? Why today? Eric lifted the phone fully now, unable to stop himself. His thumb shook against the glass as he opened the message. Please don't let this be what I think it is. But the truth arrived before he was ready. A single short message, a breath-stealing sentence. His world tilted. His pulse hammered inside his ears. The church, the guests, the soft music, everything blurred as he read the words once, then again, his throat going dry. His fingers lowered the phone slowly, as if he didn't want anyone else to see the name on the screen. He wanted time to freeze so he could think, but the moment pushed forward on its own, as moments always do. A soft gasp escaped him, barely audible, but enough to shift Charlotte's smile into concern. He felt the weight of the future crashing into the weight of the past, colliding so suddenly he could barely breathe. He had no idea what was coming next, but he knew life had just changed. And hey, before we go deeper, if you've ever had life twist on you at the worst possible moment, drop a like so more people can find stories like this. Before Eric could gather a single coherent thought, the officiant's voice floated forward again, steady and ceremonial. And will you take Charlotte to be your wedded wife? But the words never reached their intended finish, because Eric, still staring at the message on his screen, felt the ground shift beneath him. His throat tightened, his body locked, his eyes widened in disbelief. The message was short, painfully short, but it carried enough force to break the world in half. Eric, I'm at Mercy Hospital. The twins are coming. Please hurry. He didn't breathe for a moment. Couldn't. Twins? The words slammed into him like the collision of two realities, the man standing at the altar and the man he used to be with Grace. His mouth parted slightly, but no sound came out. Charlotte noticed his stillness first. Eric, she whispered, uncertainty creeping into her tone. She slowed her steps, eyes scanning his expression. Guests leaned in, sensing something was off. A ripple of curiosity traveled across the pews. Someone's program fluttered to the floor. The organist stumbled over a note and fell silent. Eric finally exhaled, a shaky breath that carried more than shock. It carried the truth he had buried, the choices he had made, and everything he never expected to face on this day. His voice was raw when he spoke, barely louder than a breath. The twins. Charlotte froze mid-step, her veil settling around her shoulders like untouched snow. Confusion washed over her face, not anger, not yet, just fear. The kind of fear that comes when a woman senses the ground beneath her relationship shifting. What? Twins? She whispered. He didn't answer immediately. He couldn't. His mind raced back to Grace, her smile, her steady voice, her quiet courage, the softness in her laugh, the warmth she radiated without trying. He remembered nights in her loft, jazz playing low, the two of them swaying under warm city lights. All of it hit him at once. Eric, the officiant asked carefully, his voice echoing through the suddenly quiet church. The candles flickered along the walls. A few guests gasped. Charlotte's bouquet dipped slightly in her trembling hands. Eric swallowed hard, still staring at the message, reading it again and again as if hoping it would change. But it didn't. It only grew heavier in his chest. Grace was in a hospital bed right now. She was alone. And she was bringing two children into the world, children he hadn't known existed until this very moment. The weight of that truth shook him. He lifted his eyes slowly toward Charlotte, and for a second, their lives hung in a fragile balance. She searched his face for an explanation, for something she could grab onto, but he had nothing. Only shock, only truth, only the gravity of what he had just learned. He took one small step backward. The church collectively inhaled. Whispers swept across the room. Cold feet? Is he sick? What's going on? Who's Grace? But Eric wasn't listening to any of it. His mind was already beyond the church walls, racing toward a hospital room he had never expected to run to. His heart thundered with a single realization. Grace needed him. The twins needed him. Right now. The world he stood in, the decorated altar, the guests, the ceremony, collapsed around him like a quiet implosion. Nothing made sense anymore, except the message in his hand. His voice was barely audible when he spoke again. I have to go. The moment the words "I have to go" left Eric's mouth, the church fell into a hush so deep it felt like sound itself had stopped. Charlotte's lips parted, her breath catching as his meaning slowly reached her. The bouquet she held dipped, petals trembling as if they sensed the shift in the air. "Go. Where?" she whispered, voice shaking. But Eric was already stepping away from the altar, his eyes darting between the exit and the phone that still displayed Grace's message. His heartbeat pounded so loudly he could barely hear the murmurs rising all around him. He took another step back, then another. His groom's shoes tapped against the polished floor, one slow step, then a faster one, until instinct took over and his movements turned into something closer to a run. A few guests gasped. Someone stood, as if trying to understand whether to reach for him or let him go. The officiant lowered his book, baffled. The organist's hands hovered over the keys, unsure whether to play or stay still. Eric didn't look back. He couldn't. If he looked at Charlotte's face again, he would fall apart in a different way. The kind of break that would keep him frozen at the altar, unable to move, unable to answer Grace's call for help. So he kept going. As he rushed down the aisle, a wave of whispers followed him like a trail. Cold feet? What happened? Did he get bad news? Who's Grace? But those questions felt 1,000 miles away. He barely felt the air on his face as he pushed through the heavy doors into the garden space behind the church. The sunlight hit him hard, warm, bright, unfiltered, but even that couldn't settle the shaking inside him. Jasmine petals drifted across the stone steps, carried by a soft Georgia breeze. They swirled around his shoes as he moved, sticking to the edges of his suit pants. The symbolic contrast wasn't lost on him. Inside was the life he had planned. Outside, the life that was calling him back. His fingers tightened around the wedding ring he'd been holding moments earlier. The metal felt heavier now, as if it carried the weight of every choice he'd made, and the ones he hadn't. He didn't drop it, but he couldn't bring himself to slide it into his pocket either. He just held it, pressed it between his fingers, felt its weight, felt its question. His steps quickened on the path, the rhythm of his shoes picking up speed until he was sprinting. Really sprinting. The kind of run that comes from instinct, not reason. His breath came uneven. His chest tightened. But all he could hear was the echo of Grace's message. "The twins are coming. Please hurry." His heart thundered. Twins. The word still felt unreal. His children, already arriving in a hospital room without him. Grace, alone, fighting through the waves of labor. A woman who once trusted him with her heart, now bringing 2 lives into the world without knowing whether he would show up. He turned sharply toward the parking area, nearly stumbling as his shoes skidded on the pavement. A few guests had followed him outside, standing near the doorway in stunned silence. Is he okay? Did something happen? Is this some kind of emergency? He didn't answer. He didn't slow down. His entire world had narrowed into one urgent truth. Grace needed him. The twins needed him. He had to get there, no matter what. He yanked his car door open, breathless, chest heaving. The ring was still in his hand, pressed so tightly into his palm that it left a faint imprint on his skin. He stared at it for a split second, just long enough to acknowledge the life he was leaving behind in this moment, then slipped it into the console beside him. The engine roared to life. The future he thought he'd planned faded behind him. He sped away from the church, leaving a cloud of whispers and confused faces in his wake. Inside the sanctuary, the world paused. Outside, his life rushed forward, and viewers felt it, the moment everything snapped into motion, because a single question now hung in the air. Why today? Why this timing? Why didn't he know about the twins? And what will he find when he reaches the hospital? His hands tightened around the steering wheel as he pulled onto the road. Nothing would ever be the same. Eric had no idea how fast he was driving until the wind pressed hard against the side of his car, tugging at his suit jacket and rattling the edge of the window. His hands gripped the steering wheel like it was the only thing anchoring him to reality. He could still hear the soft echo of Charlotte calling his name inside the church, the gentle confusion in her voice folding into silence. But that sound drifted farther and farther away, the more distance he put between himself and the altar. His thoughts were scattered, flashing between the glowing chandeliers of the wedding, the jasmine carried by the breeze, the gasps behind him, and the message on his phone that had changed everything. The twins are coming. Please hurry. He repeated the words in his mind, each time feeling the weight settle deeper in his chest. He'd never imagined he'd be driving away from his own wedding. He'd never imagined this would be the day he learned he was a father, twice over. He'd never imagined Grace would call him now, of all days. But here he was, speeding through Atlanta like a man fighting time itself. Every red light he passed felt like an accusation. Every turn felt like a second lost. Every breath felt like a reminder that Grace was facing something huge and difficult, possibly afraid, definitely alone. He imagined her in the hospital bed, sweat on her forehead, pain tightening her body, her voice shaky. He didn't know exactly what that room looked like right now, but his chest tightened with the feeling that he should have been there already, that he should have been part of every moment leading up to this one. His pulse hammered harder. He switched lanes, pushing the engine, heart racing as the skyline blurred past him. Back at the church, Charlotte stood frozen in place. The guests had slowly begun to shift in their seats, confusion whispering across the sanctuary. Her bouquet lay loosely in her hand, petals dropping to the floor one by one. A small group approached her, offering comfort, trying to understand what had just happened. But Charlotte didn't answer them. She just stared at the door where Eric had vanished, her expression a mixture of disbelief, hurt, and a question she didn't dare speak aloud. Outside the church, the sun continued shining as if nothing had gone wrong. The bells in the tower chimed gently, their soft ring drifting across the courtyard. Life carried on around her. Just not the life she expected today. At the same moment, miles away, Grace gripped the side of her hospital bed. A contraction tore through her, sharp and forceful, and her voice trembled as she whispered a quiet hymn to steady her breath. Marisol's hands guided her through it, steady, calm, reassuring. "You're doing well, Grace," she murmured. "You're almost there." Between contractions, Grace closed her eyes and allowed herself one fragile moment to feel something she hadn't admitted in months. She wanted Eric there. Not because she couldn't do this alone, she had done everything alone for months, but because these were their children. Because some part of her heart still held on to the man she had known before everything fell apart. Her voice softened into another breathy hymn, a sound full of hope, pain, and longing. Even in pain, her spirit remained strong. Back on the road, Eric pressed the gas a little harder. Just get there. Just get there. The tension thickened as he approached the final turn toward Mercy Hospital. His heartbeat quickened, not with fear, but with something deeper and far more overwhelming. One question repeated over and over in his mind. What happens when the past you ran from becomes the future you can't escape? Let me know in the comments. If you were Eric, what would you do? Stay at the altar or run to the hospital? Welcome to Mr. Stevens Stories, where powerful life lessons are shared through unforgettable storytelling. If you're new here, we're glad to have you. Subscribe and join us for more inspiring stories that motivate, uplift, and open the mind. And please comment the time and where you're watching this story. I'd love to know who's tuning in. Eric stood frozen at the altar while the last fragments of Charlotte's voice faded somewhere behind the fog spreading through his mind. The message from Grace wasn't just sitting on the screen, it was pulsing through him, reshaping every heartbeat, every breath, every sense of control he thought he had. The glow from the stained glass windows washed across him in soft patterns of gold and rose, but the beauty of the church no longer reached him. Georgia's sunlight shimmered, candles flickered gently, and jasmine drifted in through the open windows, but none of it quieted the trembling in his hand. He felt it again, the way his breath hitched, the faint tremor in his thumb as the ring pressed against his palm. That small shaking had started long before he read the message. Long before Charlotte reached the aisle. Long before anyone knew anything was wrong. It was the part of him that had never closed the door on Grace. His chest felt tight, as though someone was slowly pressing a hand against his heart. He tried to straighten his shoulders, tried to steady himself, but even his posture felt uncertain. The space between him and Charlotte widened in his mind, even though she was only steps away. Guests continued smiling at first. They assumed everything was moving forward. After all, weddings are built on expectation. People believe things will go as planned. People trust the scenery more than the truth forming in front of them. But Eric felt the truth rising inside him with the force of an old ache. Something had cracked open the moment he saw her name. He lowered the phone slightly, trying to register what he felt, trying to breathe through it. Somewhere behind him, A guest whispered about the beauty of the stained glass. Another commented on the warm breeze passing through the open windows. Their words felt far away, like echoes in a tunnel. Charlotte kept walking toward him, unaware of the shift happening inside the man she was about to marry. Eric's eyes lifted to hers, and guilt struck him hard. Charlotte's smile was soft, hopeful, full of meaning he could no longer carry with steady certainty. She reached out as though the moment were still whole. He knew she saw something in his face, a small change, a break in the mask he wore, because her steps slowed. Not enough for the guests to notice, but enough for the air between them to change. But he couldn't hide the truth in his eyes. Not anymore. His hand tightened around the ring again, the tremor spreading from his thumb into his wrist. The unsaid words gathered like weight in his throat. His world, the one he had been about to step into, suddenly felt fragile. He layered a breath on top of another, trying to keep himself upright. This isn't cold feet, he told himself. This is something else, something bigger. The organist shifted softly to a lower chord, filling the room with a tender sound meant to inspire calm. But for Eric, the music felt like it was pressing into his thoughts, urging him to make a decision he wasn't sure he could make. He looked down again at the message. Those words repeated in his mind, each time landing harder. His vision blurred at the edges for a moment, and he blinked until the church regained shape. The message wasn't a mistake. Grace wasn't reaching out for closure or explanation. She was reaching out because something urgent and real was happening. His children, his twins, his past, his unfinished story. He swallowed hard, trying to digest the truth that his life had split in half in an instant. Charlotte took a cautious step, then another. She sensed him drifting, though she didn't yet know why. Her bouquet trembled in her grip. A soft frown appeared, small, but enough to reveal concern. She whispered, barely audible. Her voice barely reached him. He stood suspended in a moment that felt both slow and impossibly fast. The jasmine scent drifting through the windows no longer felt comforting. His suit felt tight. His surroundings blurred into a quiet, heavy silence. He lifted his head slowly, meeting her gaze. Her eyes were full of expectation. His were full of conflict. He realized then that the crack in his chest wasn't just about Grace. It was about everything he had avoided facing. His hand trembled again. This time, the ring nearly slipped from his fingers. He caught it with a startled breath. Behind him, someone sighed contentedly, unaware of the emotional storm building at the altar. Eric inhaled deeply, willing himself to find solid ground. But the ground beneath him had already shifted. It was the moment he realized he couldn't stand still anymore. Before anything else could be said, before the officiant could speak again, the pressure inside him pushed the truth to the surface. Everything he thought he was ready for now collided with everything he didn't know he still carried. He felt the fracture. He felt the guilt. He felt the unresolved love. He felt the fear. He felt the responsibility. He felt everything, and the weight of it nearly brought him to his knees. His lips parted slightly, but no sound came out. He looked at Charlotte, then at the phone, then back at the life he was seconds away from stepping into. His world was no longer clear. The crack in his chest had become a fault line. If you've ever had life hit you at the wrong moment, drop a like so more people can hear stories like this. For a moment, Charlotte didn't understand why Eric was standing so still. She had taken her final step toward him, bouquet trembling slightly in her hands, waiting for the warmth he always gave her when their eyes met. But now, he looked somewhere between her and nowhere, as if his soul had slipped out of the moment. "Eric," she whispered again, uncertainty slipping into her tone. He didn't answer. Not yet. He couldn't. The phone in his hand might as well have been a stone tied to his chest. The message from Grace kept flashing in his mind with painful clarity. "The twins are coming. Please, hurry." The words hit him again like a quiet explosion. The organist faltered mid-note, sensing the shift in the room. The sound dropped into silence, leaving everyone with nothing but the soft whisper of the breeze from the open windows. The jasmine scent that earlier felt peaceful now clung to the air with a strange heaviness. Charlotte's smile faded entirely as she took in the shaken look on Eric's face. She searched his eyes, trying to understand what had changed. He looked pale, as if the message on his phone had drained the color straight out of him. "What is it?" she whispered, taking a half step closer. Eric swallowed hard. His throat felt tight. Words sat there, stuck between truth and fear. He forced them out in a breath that barely made it past his lips. Twins? It came out low, almost as if he didn't believe it himself. Charlotte's eyebrows pulled together, her expression folding instantly into confusion. Twins? She echoed, her voice thin. The guests heard it too. A ripple moved across the pews. People leaned forward in their seats, whispers tightening into short bursts of speculation. Did he say twins? Whose twins? What's going on? Is something wrong? A child in the back row whispered loudly to her mother, "Mommy, what's happening?" And even that small voice carried through the room. The officiant cleared his throat, attempting to regain control. "Is everything all right?" he asked gently, though he already knew it wasn't. Eric looked at him but couldn't form an answer. A rush of heat and cold moved through him at once. Everything around him blurred, except the message still glowing on the phone. He knew he had to move. He knew he couldn't stay here. He knew Grace wasn't calling him out of the blue, not on this day, not for something small. His silence stretched, tightening the air. Charlotte slowly lowered her bouquet, petals brushing her gown as they dipped. Her lips parted with a trembling inhale. She didn't cry, not yet, but the hurt took shape in her eyes with every passing second he didn't speak. "Eric," she whispered, "why do you look like that? What's going on?" He stepped back. Just one step, but it felt like he had crossed a line he couldn't return from. People in the front row reacted immediately, shifting in their seats, whispering louder. Is he leaving? Is he about to faint? Is this an emergency? Where is he going? Charlotte saw him moving away and took an instinctive step forward, trying to hold the moment together. "Please, tell me what's happening," she said softly. But Eric's mind wasn't here anymore. His thoughts were spiraling around Grace lying in a hospital bed and two children fighting their way into the world. He imagined her gripping the rails of the bed, her breaths quickening, her voice trembling through the pain. He imagined her alone, scared, calling him because she had no one else to reach out to. He felt the ground tilt again. "Eric," Charlotte repeated, her voice cracking this time. "Talk to me." He blinked, trying to gather himself. But the truth was too heavy now to hide. I have to go," he said quietly, each word carved out of confusion, guilt, and urgency. Charlotte's face froze as if struck. "What?" she whispered. He glanced toward the doors, the path out of the church, the path toward Mercy Hospital. His heart pulled him forward before his legs even moved. The officiant attempted to intervene. "Eric, perhaps step aside for a moment? We can pause until—" But Eric didn't answer. His body moved before his mind had time to reason it through. He turned away from the altar. A collective gasp rose behind him. The room shifted. The story everyone expected to unfold shattered in real time. He took a step toward the aisle, then another, faster. The whispers swelled into a wave behind him. He's leaving. Did he just walk away? Oh my goodness. This can't be real. Charlotte felt her knees weaken. Her bouquet slipped from her fingers, hitting the aisle carpet with a soft thud. Petals scattered, mirroring the unraveling of the moment. She watched him take off down the aisle, her breath breaking in uneven pieces. The man she loved, the man she believed she was marrying today, was moving farther from her with every step. Eric didn't dare look back. If he did, he wouldn't be able to leave. And he had to leave. Not for himself, not for escape, but because two new lives, his lives, were entering the world. As he reached the back doors, a flash of memory hit him so suddenly it nearly stopped him mid-stride. Grace laughing in her loft, soft jazz in the background, her leaning into him with quiet trust, her head against his shoulder, her smile warm and easy, the way she once made him feel whole without trying. The memory stabbed through the tension like a bright blade. He pushed the doors open. Sunlight flooded around him, warm and bright and too honest. The garden outside smelled of jasmine and fresh-cut grass. He sprinted down the steps, barely noticing the petals carried by the wind. Behind him, inside the church, the perfect ceremony had collapsed. Outside, a different story had begun, one he never expected, one he couldn't ignore, and Charlotte stood frozen in the center of the aisle, staring at the doors he had disappeared through, realization settling slowly, painfully, into her chest. Her world had just shifted. His had already changed. Theirs, whatever it once was, would never be the same. Eric barely felt the pavement under his feet as he sprinted across the garden courtyard. His breath came in uneven gasps, each inhale scraping against the tightness in his chest. The sunlight hit him hard, bright and unfiltered, but the warmth didn't slow him down. He pushed through it, his mind fixed on one message blinking across the screen of his phone. The twins are coming. Please hurry. His car waited at the edge of the lot, polished for the wedding, but now streaked with dust in his tunnel vision. He fumbled with the keys, dropping them once before catching them with shaking fingers. His suit jacket tugged awkwardly against his shoulders as he yanked the door open and collapsed into the driver's seat. The door slammed behind him. The sound felt final. He shoved the key into the ignition, turning it so hard the steering column clicked loudly. The engine roared to life, and a burst of air from the vents hit his face, sharp and cool, grounding him for half a second. Then he hit the gas. The tires screeched against the asphalt as he shot forward. His reflection in the rearview mirror was flushed and frantic, but he didn't look long enough to process it. The church shrank in the distance, growing smaller with every passing moment, and with it, the life he had been moments away from stepping into. A red light flashed ahead. Eric slowed just enough to avoid a collision, then punched through as soon as it shifted. Atlanta's weekend traffic pulsed around him, cars honking, a bus sighing at a stop, sunlight bouncing off the glass towers. His grip on the wheel tightened so much his knuckles whitened. Why didn't she tell me sooner? Why now? Why today? Why didn't I know? The questions hammered through him as he shot down Peachtree Street, weaving between cars. Every time he blinked, he saw Grace lying in a hospital bed, her breath shaking, her fingers gripping the rails for stability. He imagined her alone, calling him because she had no one else to rely on. It pierced him in a way he wasn't prepared for, a sharp ache of guilt mixed with fear. He pressed harder on the gas. Humidity clung to the windshield despite the air conditioning. The sky stretched wide and blue above him, sunlight catching every surface. But inside the car, everything felt dimmer, tighter, heavier. He glanced at his passenger's seat where his suit jacket lay in a heap, wrinkled from the sprint. His tie hung crooked around his neck, still knotted from the ceremony that had never finished. The ring he'd been holding sat in the console cup holder, a small circle of metal that suddenly felt like a reminder of choices he didn't know how to sort through. The faint imprint it left on his palms still tingled. Another red light, another impatient tap of his fingers against the wheel, another wave of tension tightening his shoulders. He wiped a hand across his face, feeling the mix of sweat and stress collecting at his hairline. His mind replayed the message again. The twins are coming. Please hurry. Twins. 2 children. His children. The word pressed into him harder each time it resurfaced. He had missed everything. The pregnancy, the preparations, the quiet fear Grace must have carried alone. He hadn't been there to hold her hand during the doctor visits, hadn't been there to see the first sonogram, hadn't been there to listen to the heartbeat. That realization made his chest twist. A flash hit him suddenly, not from the road, but from his memory. Grace sitting beside him on her couch, tapping her fingers against his knee as they listened to soft jazz. She had looked at him with eyes so warm he sometimes forgot how cold his world could be. She laughed easily then, leaning into him as if she had every right to do so. And she did. Back then, she did. The memory stung now. It felt too close, too unburied. He shook his head, forcing himself back into the present. Traffic thickened near the midtown stretch, cars stacking in slow lanes. Eric swerved around them, earning a few honks he didn't bother acknowledging. His pulse throbbed in sync with the rumble of the engine. Each delay made his breath hitch. What if he didn't get there in time? What if something went wrong? What if the babies came before he could even hold them? The thought made him press down even harder. He turned onto the hospital exit ramp so sharply the tires squealed. Mercy Hospital's silver sign glinted ahead, catching the afternoon sun. The building rose in clean, sharp lines, a place built for beginnings and endings, joy and heartbreak. He swallowed hard. His entire life was about to change in that building. The car jerked to a stop in the emergency lane. He threw it into park without thinking and ripped off his seatbelt. His jacket slipped further off the passenger seat as he shoved the door open and stepped out, heart pounding in his ears. He ran across the pavement toward the entrance, ignoring the startled looks from people stepping aside to give him space. His shoes slapped against the ground with every hurried step. He didn't feel the sweat on his forehead or the sting of the sun against his skin. All he felt was urgency. He burst through the revolving doors into the cool lobby air, chest heaving, body trembling. His eyes scanned the room, searching for the reception desk, searching for direction, searching for hope. His hand tightened around the phone again, the same phone carrying the message that had torn his world open. His voice cracked when he whispered to himself, "Please, let me be on time." The weight of that plea carried more truth than anything he'd spoken in years, because this was no longer just a trip to a hospital. This wasn't a response to an old flame. This wasn't about regret or nostalgia. This was fatherhood, arriving without warning, rewriting everything he thought he knew about himself. He stepped forward, ready to face whatever waited for him in the next hallway. The moment of collision had passed. Now, the journey began. Grace exhaled slowly as another contraction rolled through her, starting low in her abdomen and climbing upward like a tightening wave she couldn't stop. She gripped the rails of the hospital bed, the cool metal grounding her as the fluorescent ceiling lights softened into a gentle blur. Mercy Hospital smelled faintly of lavender, blended into the sterile tang of antiseptic. It was an unexpected comfort, a scent that reminded her of home, of evenings when her grandmother simmered lavender oil on the stove to calm the house after long days. "Breathe, Grace." Just like that, Marisol murmured from her left side, her voice steady and warm. Grace nodded, jaw clenched as she worked through the pain. Despite the strain, she kept her movements calm. She tilted her head back slightly, humming an old hymn under her breath, a quiet melody passed down through generations of women who had endured far more than she imagined she ever would. The tune steadied her heartbeat. It kept her present. It reminded her she wasn't alone, even when her mind whispered otherwise. Every few seconds, Marisol wiped Grace's forehead with a cool cloth. "You're doing beautifully," she said, squeezing Grace's hand. "Almost there. Keep your focus." Grace curled forward slightly, breathing through another contraction. Her eyes glistened, not just from the pain but from the weight behind everything happening today. "Is he coming?" she whispered before she could stop herself. Marisol hesitated. Not long enough for Grace to notice, but long enough for the truth to sit between them. "He got the message," Marisol said softly. "We did all we could." Grace nodded, swallowing hard. It was the closest she could get to admitting the ache she kept inside. She didn't want to depend on Eric. She hadn't allowed herself that luxury for months, but the pain of this moment made her long for something she thought she'd buried. A soft knock came from the hallway, followed by Andrea's anxious voice. "Grace, you okay? You need anything?" She called through the cracked door. Grace let out a shaky breath, eyes closing against the sting of another contraction. "Just keep texting him," she managed. Tell him we're okay so far." Andrea nodded and disappeared again, her footsteps pacing the hallway like a metronome of worry. Marisol leaned closer. "You're strong," she whispered, "and you're not alone. Let's take the next breath together." Grace inhaled slowly, willing her body to soften just enough to ride the contraction instead of fighting it. The pain didn't ease, it never did, but the rhythm became bearable for a moment. Between contractions, the world softened into fragments. The hum of the machines, the distant rolling of a cart, the faint laughter of a nurse down the hall, the quiet swish of Marisol adjusting blankets around her. And then, like a memory drifting through an open window, Grace saw him, Eric, not as he was now, but as he once had been with her. Her breathing steadied as her mind slipped into the past. She saw his hand reaching for hers in the loft, soft jazz rolling through the air. The lights had been low, the mood warm, her head resting against his chest as they swayed together. His chin brushed her temple as he whispered something playful, making her laugh until her stomach tightened. He held her like she was something safe, something he didn't want to lose, something more than a fleeting moment. In the memory, she tilts her face up toward him. He smiled, that quiet, unguarded smile he rarely revealed to the world. And then he spun her once, gently, catching her like she weighed nothing. The memory loosened her chest, but it also tightened something else, the ache of wanting him here, wanting that version of him, wanting the man who once made her believe in forever. A contraction struck suddenly, snapping her back to the present. She gasped, gripping the rail again. The hymn faltered on her lips. Sweat rolled down her temple. Marisol steadied her. "That's it. Hold my hand." "You're doing so well," she said, her voice unwavering. Grace clenched her teeth, eyes squeezing shut. Her breath shuddered. When the contraction eased, she let out a long, trembling exhale, her body trembling from the release. "He should be here," she whispered. It wasn't anger. It was not accusation. It was longing, fragile, quiet, honest. Marisol didn't respond at first. She understood too well the complexity of those words. She rubbed Grace's back gently. "Sometimes the people we need most don't arrive on time," she said softly. "But let's trust he'll walk in before it's too late." Grace nodded, though her breath hitched again. She wasn't sure if she believed it. She wasn't sure if she had the strength to hope. Another contraction tore through her, stronger than the last. She doubled forward, her fingers digging into Marisol's palm. "That's it. Breathe with it," Marisol instructed, guiding her through each second. The room swayed around her. Pain pressed against her ribs. Her body tightened, then released, then tightened again. Minutes passed in waves. Andrea peeked inside again, breathless, phone still in her hand. "Grace." "I texted him again. I told him the babies are close. I told him you're asking for him," she said quietly. Grace swallowed. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Thank you." The next contraction came before she could breathe properly. She pressed her forehead against her arm, humming her hymn again, not for the rhythm this time, but for strength. Pain radiated down her spine and across her hips, intense enough to blur her vision. She wasn't afraid of giving birth. She was afraid of doing it without him. But she didn't say that out loud. She didn't have to. Marisol saw it in the way her eyes flickered toward the door each time footsteps passed in the hall. Andrea heard it in the tremble of her voice. Grace felt it in the way her heart squeezed each time the door stayed closed. Still, she kept pushing, kept breathing, kept humming the hymn that had carried so many women before her. Because that's who Grace was, steady, resilient, rooted in faith, even when her heart ached. Long before hospital lights, long before unanswered messages, long before Grace whispered through pain that he should be there. There was a spring morning in Atlanta, the day their story truly began. Grace remembered it vividly, even now as she labored in a hospital room miles away from that moment. The memory arrived gently, like a breath of warm air brushing against old places in her heart. Atlanta's skyline shimmered that day, the sun turning the high-rise windows into sheets of light. She had driven with her windows cracked open, letting the mild breeze carry in snippets of gospel music from the playlist she'd grown up with, the songs that made her feel grounded, centered, and brave enough to walk into rooms where people often underestimated her. She was finishing her MBA then, juggling coursework and a part-time job at the community bank. The business seminar she was headed to wasn't supposed to change her life, it was just a requirement. But she chose her outfit carefully anyway, a soft cream blouse tucked into tailored pants, her natural curls pinned neatly but still full of character. Grace never believed in shrinking to fit a room. And she didn't know it yet, but that day, someone would notice. As she parked and walked toward the conference center, something overhead caught her attention. A helicopter descending toward the rooftop helipad. Its blades cut through the morning air, sending a rush of wind downward. She shielded her eyes from the sun and watched it land. People murmured in excitement. Someone behind her whispered, "That must be Eric Armstrong." She'd heard the name, one of Atlanta's most prominent CEOs, known for sleek tech innovations and ruthless boardroom moves. His face occasionally appeared on magazine covers, often paired with headlines about success, power, or his latest acquisition. Grace never imagined she'd speak to him, much less everything that happened afterward. The seminar hall buzzed with energy. Dozens of students gathered, notebooks open, eyes forward. Grace took a seat near the front, adjusting her pen and smoothing her notes. Her gospel playlist still played softly in her mind, calming the nerves she refused to show. A few minutes later, Eric walked onto the stage. He looked polished and confident. Navy suit fitted perfectly, expression focused but approachable. His presence shifted the room. Conversations stopped. Cameras lifted. The click of heels and dress shoes softened into stillness. Grace didn't swoon like the others, but she did notice him, and he noticed her. Though not yet, Eric began speaking about innovation, leadership, and community impact. His tone was steady, practiced, but something about the way he explained ambition resonated with Grace. He spoke of trials, setbacks, failures, not the polished success people saw in magazines, the struggle behind it. For a moment, Grace forgot her pen. Her eyes stayed locked on him. When the Q&A session began, hands shot up everywhere. Grace hesitated, only for a second. Something inside her pushed her to stand. "Mr. Armstrong," she said when he called on her, her voice carrying clearly through the hall. "You speak a lot about expansion and growth, but how do you ensure your companies support the communities they enter? How do you keep your profit from overshadowing people? A murmur rippled through the crowd. Bold question, a necessary one. Eric paused, not offended, but intrigued. His gaze settled on her with unexpected depth. That's a fair question, he said, stepping closer to the edge of the stage. And it's one I don't hear often enough. Community is the foundation of everything I build. Profit without purpose doesn't interest me, but I think people like you, he nodded slightly toward her, are the ones who truly understand what impact means. Grace felt her heart skip, not because he complimented her, but because he meant it. She saw sincerity in his eyes, something he didn't show to everyone. Maybe, he added with a small smile, you can tell me more about your perspective over lunch. The room reacted. Students gasped. A few whispered. One girl elbowed her friend with a grin. Grace froze for a heartbeat, not expecting the invitation. But she wasn't the kind of woman to shrink. She smiled, steady and warm. I'd like that, she answered. Lunch wasn't glamorous, not in the way one might expect from a billionaire CEO. They went to a soul food cafe Grace loved, tucked between two brick buildings off Auburn Avenue. She ordered fried chicken and collard greens. Eric hesitated, then ordered the same. When he bit into the chicken, juice dripping onto his cuff, he blinked in surprise. This is incredible, he said. Grace laughed, a full, genuine laugh that made her shoulders relax. They talked for hours, not about business pitches or corporate forecasts, but about life. He told her how isolating his position felt at times, how people admired him but rarely challenged him the way she had. He admitted he felt disconnected from real community. Grace told him about her neighborhood, her grandmother, her dreams of using finance to uplift under-resourced communities. She admitted she feared success would pull her away from the people she wanted to serve. Eric listened, really listened, in a way she wasn't used to. He asked thoughtful questions. He shared more than she expected. He laughed more freely than anyone had seen him do at company functions. At one point, a smudge of sauce ended up on his nose. Grace chuckled, reaching for a napkin but stopping when he wiped it himself, looking embarrassed. That's what I get for pretending I'm sophisticated, he joked. You're doing all right, she teased. Their eyes lingered a moment too long. That was when it happened. The first quiet realization. Eric looked at her with something new in his expression, something warm, unguarded, almost gentle. She's different, he thought, almost startled by how naturally it settled into him. Grace didn't know it yet, but her presence cracked something open inside him, a space he didn't realize was empty until she walked into it. That afternoon, as sunlight poured through the cafe windows and the hum of lunchtime conversations faded into the background, something shifted between them. Two people from different worlds found a soft middle ground, a place where ambition met compassion, where power met purpose, where two hearts heard each other clearly for the first time. And neither of them walked away from that lunch unchanged. Grace liked to think of the months after that soul food lunch as a season, one of the rare ones in life where everything feels both fresh and meaningful, like a warm breeze pushing toward something hopeful. For Eric, it was the first time in years he allowed himself to slow down enough to feel present. For Grace, it was the first time someone from a world so different from hers didn't make her feel small. Together, they created a rhythm neither knew they needed until it existed. Atlanta felt different during that time, softer somehow. The city lights glowed warmer, the skyline seemed less imposing, and every place they visited together carried a quiet memory. One of the first major events they attended as a couple was a charity gala in Buckhead. It was a world of polished marble floors, tall glass chandeliers, and conversations wrapped in soft but pointed tones. Grace arrived in a deep green gown that hugged her silhouette with elegant simplicity, her curls carefully styled. When she stepped out of the car, Eric's breath caught, not because she looked glamorous, but because she carried herself with an effortless confidence. Inside the ballroom, whispers trailed behind them. That must be her. She's beautiful. Wonder how long this will last. Grace felt the glances, but she didn't shrink. She lifted her chin, placed her hand lightly on Eric's arm, and walked with him across the room as though she belonged there, because she did. Eric noticed the murmurs too. The way certain businessmen's wives exchanged looks, the way a few colleagues pretended to be friendly but couldn't hide their judgment. But Grace handled every interaction with grace and calm strength. Whenever someone asked her what she did, she didn't shy away from describing her community work and her mission to uplift marginalized neighborhoods. At one point, Eric leaned down to whisper, "You're handling this better than I am." Grace smiled, her eyes shining under the chandelier's glow. "I've dealt with worse," she teased lightly. You forget, I grew up with aunties who'll call you out before you finish your sentence. Eric laughed, a real laugh, the kind that softened the tension in his shoulders. Grace didn't just fit into his world, she challenged it, brightened it, and humanized it. But the gala was only one side of their shared life. Another memory warmed Grace from the inside. Even now in her hospital bed, Eric at her family's backyard reunion. The day had been hot, the kind where Atlanta's humidity wrapped itself around everyone like a thick blanket. Kids ran through sprinklers, uncles manned the grill with exaggerated seriousness, and the aroma of ribs and seasoned chicken filled the air. When Grace brought Eric through the gate, conversations paused, eyes widened. Heads turned. A white billionaire CEO stepping into a predominantly black family cookout wasn't an everyday sight, not in their neighborhood, but Eric stood there, hands tucked nervously into his pockets, trying his best to look casual. Miss Loretta, Grace's grandmother, shuffled forward with a knowing smirk. Well now, she said, adjusting her glasses as she looked him up and down. Ain't you a tall glass of milk? Eric blinked, unsure whether to laugh. Grace snorted behind him, stifling a smile. Miss Loretta reached out and pinched his cheek gently. You better treat my grandbaby right, you hear? Or I'll come find you myself. Yes, ma'am, Eric replied instantly, standing straighter. The entire yard erupted into laughter. And just like that, the tension dissolved. Grace watched Eric that day, watched him laugh with her uncles, watched him struggle to eat a rib without getting sauce on his shirt, watched him dance badly when her cousins pulled him into a line dance, watched him attempt to flip burgers before being chased away from the grill. He wasn't performing. He wasn't trying to impress. He was simply present. Her heart softened in ways she didn't expect. Later that evening, after most guests had settled around tables with sweet tea and peach cobbler, Eric sat quietly beside her grandmother. They spoke for almost an hour about love, loyalty, and responsibility. Grace didn't catch the whole conversation, but she saw the way Miss Loretta's expression softened when Eric talked. She saw how gently he listened. When Grace walked over, Miss Loretta whispered in her ear, He's a good man. Hold him close while you can. Grace didn't know why that last part made her stomach tighten slightly. She brushed it off at the time. Their private nights were different. Quiet, intimate, full of unspoken understanding. Eric would bring her to his penthouse, but he preferred spending evenings at her loft. He once told her her place felt alive, felt warm, felt like something real. At night, they'd sit by the window, city lights flickering across the room. She'd play her gospel favorites softly while he queued up jazz tracks. Their playlists blended into something uniquely theirs, a harmony of worlds they never imagined would overlap. Sometimes they danced. Not extravagant ballroom dances, just slow, easy movements, his hands around her waist, her head resting on his chest. She'd listen to the steady beat of his heart, the one place he couldn't hide behind confidence or wealth. Those were the nights when she felt safest, and he felt understood. They shared dreams, too, the ones they admitted only in quiet moments. Grace told him she wanted to open financial literacy programs for young people in underserved neighborhoods. She described the kids she'd met at the bank, the families who trusted her to explain things no one ever taught them. Eric listened with full attention. You'd change the city, he told her once, more than any corporation ever could. She blushed, ducking her head. I just want to make things easier for the people who raised me. He admired that about her, deeply. When the conversation shifted to him, his tone changed. He admitted the pressure he carried, the loneliness behind success, the expectations that often felt suffocating. He told her how people treated him like a title, not a human being. Grace didn't offer pity. She offered presence. You don't have to be impressive here, she said once, touching his cheek lightly. Just be real. That sentence stuck with him in ways she never knew. There were moments, small fleeting ones, when Eric looked at her with an expression that felt like forever. Grace felt it too, somewhere quiet inside her chest. But seasons shift, as they always do. Still, those memories stayed warm in Grace's heart. They reminded her that her connection with Eric didn't happen by accident. It grew. It deepened. It mattered. Even now, even as she labored alone, longing for him, she couldn't erase the love they once shared. Before things fell apart completely, before Grace found herself alone with questions she never wanted to ask, the first quiet rip in their relationship began with Eric's parents. It happened slowly, almost silently, the kind of tension that doesn't shout, but lingers in the corners of rooms like perfume that never quite fades. Grace remembered the first evening she met them, Eric had taken her to his parents' home, a large estate north of Atlanta with a stone exterior, manicured gardens, and a driveway long enough to feel like a private road. The place was impressive, almost intimidating, but Grace walked in with her head high, wearing the navy dress Eric said made her look like she owned any room she walked into. At first glance, his mother's smile was polite. Too polite, the kind that said, "I see you, but I don't quite accept you." Eric squeezed Grace's hand gently as they stepped inside, his thumb brushing the back of her fingers in reassurance, but even he couldn't mask the subtle apprehension in his posture. His father was cordial, offering a handshake and generic compliments, but Grace noticed the small things, how he avoided asking about her work, how he directed most questions toward Eric, how he didn't look at her long enough for a connection to form. Dinner wasn't hostile, but it wasn't warm. The coded language came later, in comments that sounded harmless unless you understood the layers beneath them. Eric's mother would say things like, "Oh, she's very sweet, Eric, very spirited," or, "Your worlds are so different. How do you plan to balance that?" Or the one that lingered longest, "She seems lovely, but are you sure she fits the image your company relies on?" Grace never heard these comments directly, not at first, but Eric did, and each remark left a mark he didn't know how to handle. He tried to shield Grace from the truth, telling her little things like, "They're warming up to us," or "They just need time." But his shoulders tightened every time the subject drifted toward family. He wasn't lying, not intentionally. He just didn't know how to confront the people who raised him. The cocktail parties made things worse. His parents began hosting events without extending invitations to Grace. They'd mention them to Eric casually, as if assuming he would understand. Events for board members, or old friends, or families they'd known for years. Eric would go, feeling trapped between obligation and discomfort. He'd stand in crowded parlors beneath expensive light fixtures while people asked him where Grace was, their tone neutral but their eyes full of quiet judgment. "She's busy tonight," he'd say. Or, "She had plans." Each lie pressed down on him, building guilt brick by brick. Grace wasn't naive. She noticed him growing distant. He used to text her during long meetings, used to show up at her loft with takeout after unexpected travel days, used to reach for her without hesitation. But slowly, the gestures became less frequent. She didn't want to assume the worst. She didn't want to be the woman who jumped to conclusions. But the silence between them grew thick enough to feel. Some nights, he'd cancel plans last minute, with no explanation beyond something came up. Other nights, he'd show up physically present but mentally elsewhere, his eyes carrying the kind of tiredness she couldn't soothe. At first, she tried to ignore it. Tried to tell herself he was under pressure. Tried to give him room. But loneliness crept in quietly, the kind that settles into your bones before you realize it's packing its bags for a long stay. One evening, sitting on the couch beside him, she leaned her head on his shoulder the way she always did. Instead of kissing her forehead or pulling her closer, he kept staring ahead, lost in thought. She didn't say anything. She didn't ask, but her heart tightened in the quiet. Grace knew relationships had phases. She knew love wasn't always effortless. But this didn't feel like a shift. It felt like a retreat. She wanted to confront him, wanted to ask what was happening behind the scenes, but something inside her hesitated. Maybe she feared the answer. Maybe she feared disrupting whatever fragile balance remained. Or maybe she feared hearing him say something she wasn't ready to face. So she held her questions, held her breath, held on. Meanwhile, Eric's internal battle grew heavier. Every comment from his parents felt like a small cut. Every party she wasn't invited to added another layer of guilt. Every time he looked at her, truly looked, he felt torn between love and expectation. He never meant to pull away. He thought he could balance everything, but pressure has a way of bending even the strongest intentions. One afternoon, Grace found him sitting on the edge of her bed, elbows on his knees, fingers laced tightly. He looked exhausted, not physically, but emotionally drained in a way she hadn't seen before. "Talk to me," she said gently. He looked up at her, eyes soft but troubled. "I'm trying," he whispered. "I just don't know how to fix everything at once." She sat beside him, offering her presence without pushing for answers. He rested his head in his hands. Grace placed a hand on his back, rubbing slow circles. But she felt something then, something she didn't want to acknowledge. The space between them had changed, not broken yet, but shifting. The first fracture had formed, and neither of them knew how deep it would eventually run. The night Grace discovered she was pregnant, didn't feel dramatic at first. It felt quiet, too quiet, the kind of evening where the world wraps itself in stillness, waiting for something unspoken. It was January, cold enough that her breath curled faintly in the air each time she stepped outside. Eric had left earlier that afternoon for a business trip. His travel itinerary suddenly extended without much explanation. He hugged her before he left, but the embrace carried a distance she didn't know how to address. He said he'd call when he landed. He didn't. By the time evening settled in, Grace wandered through his penthouse trying to distract herself. She picked up a book, put it down, tried a movie, couldn't focus. She finally settled in the bathroom with a warm shower, letting the steam fill the room. But as she stepped out and caught sight of herself in the mirror, something inside her sank. Her body felt different. Not drastically, just a subtle shift she couldn't explain. A heaviness, low in her stomach, a tenderness in her chest she hadn't noticed before. Her period had been late, but with the stress she'd been under, she blamed it on exhaustion. Still, something whispered for her attention. She sat on the cool bathroom tile for a long moment, wrapped in a towel, heart fluttering unevenly. There was a test in the drawer. An old purchase, something she'd bought months ago for no reason other than preparedness. She reached for it, without thinking, hands trembling slightly as she unwrapped it. The test felt small in her hand, too light for the weight it carried. She forced herself to breathe as she followed the instructions. Time passed slowly, each second stretched thin like a wire pulled tight. When the result finally appeared, the air left her lungs. 2 lines. Clear, bold, inescapable. Her hand rose to her mouth instinctively. Her breath shook. "Why now?" She whispered into the empty room, the words trembling with fear, surprise, and something deeper she hadn't named yet. She leaned back against the wall, staring at the test as if it might change if she blinked hard enough, but stayed the same, steady, unmoving. True, she was pregnant, and not just pregnant, twins, as later confirmed by the doctor, though she didn't know that yet tonight. In the silence of Eric's bathroom, with the soft hum of the vent filling the background, she was alone with 2 truths. She loved him, and he was already slipping away. She wiped her tears with the back of her hand, trying to steady herself enough to think. Eric deserved to know. Of course he did. She knew that. But the version of him she had now didn't feel reachable. He had been distant for weeks, weighed down by expectations she couldn't see and burdens he refused to name. She didn't want to place this news on his shoulders while he was already struggling. She didn't want him to look at her with pressure instead of joy. Or worse, obligation. Grace placed the test gently on the counter, as if setting it down any harder might break the thin thread keeping her together. She walked to the window, pulling back the curtain to see the city lights glittering in the distance. They looked cold tonight, colder than she remembered. The skyline shimmered, but none of it warmed her. She whispered again, softer this time, "Why now?" Her phone buzzed suddenly. A notification, news. She tapped it without thinking, expecting some headline about city traffic or weather. Instead, she saw a photo. Eric, smiling, standing beside another woman at a charity event in New York. And the caption, "Rumors confirmed. Eric Armstrong's engagement announcement expected later this week." Grace's body went still. The article continued below, detailing his appearance with the woman, Charlotte, describing her background, the approval from his parents, the seamless fit everyone seemed eager to applaud. Grace felt her throat tighten, eyes burning. She clicked through photos, each one hitting harder than the last. Eric with Charlotte, their hands close, their smiles aligned, their posture familiar enough to suggest comfort. Her breath broke. She pressed a hand against her stomach, as if protecting the lives inside her from the blow she had just taken. Tears fell silently down her face, warm against her chilled skin. She closed the article, but the damage lingered. She didn't scream. She didn't curse. She didn't call him. She just stood there, trembling, feeling everything inside her shift. She thought of the nights they danced in her loft, the afternoons they spent talking about dreams, the look in his eyes when he whispered he cared for her. And then she remembered the distance, the excuses, the missed calls, the quiet sadness in his shoulders. She had been losing him long before this moment. A deep breath shuddered out of her. Grace made her decision. She would raise the babies alone. She would not compete with a world she was never meant to fit into. She would not beg for his attention. She would not tell him this news while another woman planned a future by his side. She placed a hand on her stomach again, a gentle, protective touch. "We're going to be okay," she whispered to the twins she hadn't met yet. "I've got you." But alone with her reflection, the tears kept falling. Andrea became her lifeline in the weeks that followed. "Oh, girl." "I'm here," Andrea said the moment Grace told her, pulling her into a tight hug. She didn't judge her. She didn't question her. She simply stood with her. Doctor visits became a routine, Andrea driving her to appointments, holding her hand when the ultrasound revealed 2 fluttering heartbeats. They laughed nervously through cravings, cried through exhaustion, held each other through hormonal storms. At night, Grace lay awake, hand resting on her belly, whispering small prayers for strength. Sometimes she imagined Eric's voice. Sometimes she imagined telling him. Sometimes she imagined him holding her through the fear. But every time she opened her eyes, the bed was empty. And so she continued alone. Silent tears, late-night cravings, backaches, moments of panic, moments of wonder, everything in between. Yet she stood firm, for the babies she already loved fiercely. She never said it aloud, but some nights she still traced his name with her finger on the sheets beside her, even while telling herself it was better this way. In the weeks after Grace made her quiet decision to raise the babies alone, life didn't slow down for either of them. It simply pulled them in different directions, each path shaped by choices, expectations, and consequences they didn't yet understand. For Eric, the world moved loudly around him. Engagement rumors had become reality faster than he could process. One photo, one leaked headline, one well-timed publicity moment, and suddenly he found himself in the middle of a celebration he didn't feel prepared for. His parents hosted the first engagement gathering, filled with warm lighting, polished floors, and guests dressed in tailored suits and shimmering dresses. People toasted with expensive glasses raised high, congratulating him with enthusiasm he couldn't fully return. "Eric, this is wonderful news. She's perfect for you. Your parents must be thrilled." He nodded, smiled, played the role expected of him. But inside, something felt off balance. Charlotte glowed beside him, her hand resting gracefully on his arm as cameras flashed around them. She was kind, composed, and thoughtful in ways that made sense for the world he lived in. She fit into the picture easily, too easily. His parents adored her. Investors approved. Friends commented on how seamless the match seemed. From the outside, it looked perfect. From the inside, Eric felt like a man standing in a room built for someone else. He found himself drifting toward the quieter corners of parties, away from the spotlight, away from the congratulations that rang hollow in his ears. Sometimes he'd catch his reflection in the polished surfaces, a man smiling at a future he wasn't sure he chose. Meanwhile, across town, Grace lived a different reality entirely. Early mornings at the community bank, late nights battling exhaustion, afternoons filled with doctor appointments, her days blended into a rhythm she learned to endure even when her body ached from carrying twins. She watched Eric's engagement unfold from a distance she didn't want to admit she cared about. Someone at work would mention seeing his picture in a business article. At the grocery store, a magazine on the rack would show his face next to headlines about wedding plans. Social media posts floated across her screen, whether she wanted them to or not. She didn't click on them. But sometimes, when the babies kicked at night and the apartment lights were low, she'd stare at her ceiling and wonder if he ever thought about her. She tried not to. She tried to focus on her growing belly, on the soft thump of tiny feet pressing against her ribs, on the names she imagined, on the life she wanted to build. Still, the contrast between their worlds was difficult to ignore. While Eric moved through engagement celebrations, Grace moved through cravings for late-night fruit cups, swelling ankles, and doctor visits where she listened to 2 heartbeats echo through the room. Sometimes she cried quietly in her car before going inside, overwhelmed by how much she carried alone. Andrea was her constant, texting her reminders, bringing snacks, cracking jokes in waiting rooms to keep Grace from breaking down. One afternoon after a long ultrasound appointment, Andrea placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Girl, you're doing this, you hear me? You're stronger than you think." Grace nodded, even though her throat tightened. Back in Eric's world, the contrast deepened. Tabloid pages printed glossy photos of him and Charlotte attending charity events, smiling at each other in coordinated outfits. Social media buzzed with comments about how perfect they looked. Even corporate newsletters wrote about the union, as though it symbolized stability itself. His parents treated Charlotte like family already, inviting her to private brunches, planning meetings, discussing wedding themes and schedules. Eric sat through these conversations, feeling like a guest in his own future. He tried to ignore the small ache in his chest, the one that arrived quietly whenever he let his thoughts drift toward Grace. He convinced himself it was nostalgia, nothing more. But it never fully went away. Grace, on the other hand, had no room for longing most days. Her body kept her busy, back pain that intensified with each passing week, appetite swings she couldn't control, and occasional contractions that made her nervous long before doctors expected labor. One night, a sharp tightening made her grip the edge of the couch. She inhaled deeply, trying to calm herself. "Not yet," she whispered, pressing a hand to her belly. "Please, not yet." She called Andrea, who rushed over immediately, rubbing her back until the pain subsided. Afterward, Grace prayed silently, not just for the babies, but for the strength to keep going. Across the city, Eric sat at a formal engagement dinner surrounded by laughter and elegant tableware. A colleague joked about bachelor party plans. Charlotte leaned into him, smiling brightly as someone clinked a glass to make a toast. Eric lifted his glass mechanically. But for a moment, a brief, fleeting moment, he imagined a different dinner table. He imagined Grace, her laughter, her warmth, her honesty. He blinked hard, pulling himself back to the present. He didn't allow himself to dwell. Still, something felt missing. Grace's nights grew longer, her belly heavier, her heart more conflicted. She wanted to hate him, wanted to push away every memory, but whenever the twins kicked, she felt something softer. Love wasn't simple, neither was disappointment. Both lived in her at the same time, and when contractions came early, small ones, inconsistent but worrying, she found herself whispering prayers again, pressing her palms against her belly as tears gathered behind her eyes. "Please let me make it through this," she said softly. "Please give me strength." Outside her window, Atlanta moved normally. Cars passing, lights glowing, the hum of life carrying on. But inside her apartment, everything felt heavy, fragile, and quiet. The world didn't know she was carrying 2 children alone. The world didn't know she cried into her pillow at night. The world didn't know the man she once loved was preparing a wedding with someone else. But the babies moved inside her, and that was enough reason to keep going. Delivered softly and naturally. If this story has pulled you in so far, consider subscribing. We've still got so much to uncover. The lights in the delivery room felt sharper now, bright enough to reflect off the metal equipment, but warm enough to soften the edges of Grace's fear. Her breaths came in quick bursts, each one trembling through her as another contraction squeezed from deep inside her body. Marisol stood at her side, hands steady, voice low and grounding. "Breathe, Grace. You're almost there. You're doing everything right." Grace nodded, though her jaw tightened from the pain pulsing through her hips and lower back. Sweat dampened the edges of her hairline, and strands of her curls clung to her forehead. She didn't bother pushing them away. All her strength was centered in the effort of bringing 2 lives into the world. Her fingers clutched the bed rails as the next wave hit. "Oh God," she whispered through clenched teeth. "Good, let it out," Marisol said, leaning closer. "You're strong. Keep going." Grace's eyes fluttered shut for a moment as she forced herself to inhale and exhale the way Marisol coached. Every breath felt like a small victory. Every contraction felt like a mountain of fire. But she stayed focused, not just because she had to, but because 2 small heartbeats depended on her. In the hallway, Andrea paced so quickly her shoes squeaked against the floor. She wiped her face repeatedly, though she wasn't sure whether the moisture came from sweat, tears, or both. Every time a nurse passed by, Andrea stopped them with the same breathless question. "Is she okay? Is my friend okay? Are the babies okay?" They always gave the same patient answer. "She's doing great. She's progressing well." But Andrea kept pacing anyway, gripping her phone tightly. She had texted Eric twice in the last hour. "Grace is pushing. Please hurry." Her screen stayed stubbornly blank of new messages. Inside the room, Grace bowed her head, whispering a soft prayer between contractions. "Lord, be with me, please." Her voice trembled, but her determination never did. Another contraction built, slow at first, then powerful. Her whole body tightened, her mind flooding with both fear and resolve. She let out a deep groan as the pressure intensified. Marisol placed a comforting hand on her back. "That's it. Big breath in. Now push." Grace pushed with everything she had. Her vision blurred. Her ears rang. Her breath caught. Pain sliced through her, raw and consuming. But beneath it all, she felt something shifting, moving, descending. "Good, Grace, that's good," Marisol encouraged, her voice carrying the strength Grace needed. "One more like that. You're almost there." Grace's head dropped back to the pillow as she panted, tears slipping from the corners of her eyes. Not from despair, just the overwhelming physical force of the moment. "Oh my God," she whispered again, her voice cracking. Her mind drifted for half a second to Eric, wondering where he was on the highway, whether he was stuck behind lights or racing through traffic, whether he even understood how much she needed him in this room right now. "He should be here," she said beneath her breath, barely audible. Marisol heard her, but didn't respond directly. Instead, she tightened her grip on Grace's hand. "You're not alone. I'm right here." Another contraction surged. Grace cried out, loud, raw, primal, her hands shaking as she curled forward. "Push, Grace. Push now." She did. She pushed through the pain, through the exhaustion, through every ounce of doubt she carried. Her body trembled. Her throat burned. She almost collapsed back onto the pillows, but the sound that followed kept her upright, a thin, piercing cry. Her eyes snapped open. One of the babies had arrived. Marisol smiled wide, tears gathering at the edges of her lashes. "That's one. Keep going, Mama. You've got another one ready to meet you." Grace let out a sob, not from pain this time, but relief. The cry filled the room, high and sharp, bouncing off the walls like a tiny proclamation of life. Andrea froze mid-step in the hallway when she heard it. Her hands flew to her mouth, her eyes filling instantly. "Oh, thank God," she whispered, tears spilling freely. Inside, Grace barely had time to gather herself before another contraction seized her. Her body wasn't done. Another life waited. Marisol helped her sit up again, bracing her shoulders. "Deep breaths. You're strong enough. I've seen women fall apart with less, but you are holding everything together." Grace squeezed her eyes shut, letting the compliment steady her. This contraction hit harder, deeper. She groaned through it, her entire body working without hesitation. "Push, Grace," Marisol urged. Grace pushed. Another cry split the air, softer at first, then growing stronger. A second baby. 2 new voices, 2 new lives. Grace fell back against the pillows as tears streamed down her face, exhaustion melting into joy. She felt her chest rise and fall in uneven breaths, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her fingertips. The doctor placed the twins on her chest, 2 tiny bodies, warm and damp, their fists curling, their cries blending into a chorus she never imagined would feel this holy. Grace lifted trembling hands, touching their small faces. "Oh, my babies," she whispered, voice barely holding together. "Thank you, Lord. Thank you." She kissed the top of each tiny head, inhaling their newness, letting the miracle settle into her bones. Andrea stepped into the doorway, hand covering her heart, tears streaking freely. "Grace," she whispered. "They're beautiful." Grace smiled, soft, tired, overflowing with love. Marisol brushed a thumb across Grace's cheek. "You did it. You brought them into the world with courage." "Few people have." Grace nodded slowly, still staring at her twins. Their little bodies rose and fell with each breath, their tiny sounds warming the air. In this moment, the world felt quiet, peaceful, sacred. She didn't think about the loneliness of the past months, or the fear, or the doubt. She thought only of these 2 little miracles resting on her chest. But outside this room, in a different part of Atlanta, Eric was gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles were white. His heart pounded, his suit jacket abandoned in the passenger seat, sweat clinging to his collar. He had no idea the twins were already here. He raced through traffic, unaware that he was moments late to one of the most important moments of his life, unaware that Grace had just whispered prayers into the air for strength and protection, unaware that 2 tiny cries had already rewritten his world. The automatic doors of Mercy Hospital slid open with a sharp whoosh as Eric burst inside, chest heaving, hair disheveled, and suit damp with sweat. He didn't look like a billionaire CEO anymore. He looked like a man running on desperation, propelled by the fear of being too late. His breath came in heavy gasps as he approached the reception desk. Grace, Armstrong, labor, where?" he choked out between breaths. The nurse behind the counter raised her brows in recognition. Someone had warned them to expect a frantic man, though the description hadn't quite captured the intensity now unfolding before her. "Third floor, maternity wing," she said calmly. "Follow the purple signs." Eric didn't wait for the end of her sentence. He turned and sprinted toward the elevators. When he reached them and saw the doors closed, he slammed the button repeatedly, pacing in tight circles. "Come on," he muttered through clenched teeth. "Please, open." A soft ding finally signaled the elevator's arrival, and he stumbled in, pressing the third floor button so hard his fingertip ached. As the elevator rose, Eric pressed his palms against the cold metal walls and closed his eyes. "Don't be too late. Please, don't let me be too late." The elevator doors opened, and he bolted out, following the purple signs down a long corridor. The hallway buzzed with faint beeping machines, rolling carts, and nurses speaking in gentle tones. His pace quickened as the numbers on the room doors blurred past him. Then he heard it. A soft, new, fragile cry. He froze mid-stride. It wasn't loud. It wasn't sharp. It was gentle, a tiny voice echoing from behind a partially open door halfway down the hall. His throat tightened. "My baby? Is that—" He moved toward the sound, drawn like gravity pulled him forward. As he reached the doorway, a figure stepped out. Andrea. Her eyes widened when she saw him. "Eric." He didn't answer. He couldn't. His breath caught in his throat as he stared past her into the room. Andrea's expression softened, tears gathering at the corners of her eyes. She gave a small nod toward the doorway. "She's inside," she whispered. "Just in time, Eric. She needs you." He swallowed hard, stepping forward. The first thing he saw was the glow of soft hospital lighting. Then Marisol near the foot of the bed, adjusting blankets. Then Grace. Grace, holding two blankets wrapped tightly around two tiny bodies. Her head was tilted slightly downward, curls falling loosely around her face. Her skin glistened with the sheen of labor, exhaustion pulling gently at her features. But her expression, tired as it was, held something he hadn't seen in a long time. Peace, tender, fragile peace. His footsteps faltered. Marisol looked up at him, offering a soft smile. "Just in time, Mr. Armstrong," she said quietly. They came fast. Eric's heart dropped into his stomach. "I missed it. I missed the moment they took their first breaths. I missed it." He moved closer, each step slow, as if the air itself had thickened. His eyes drank in every detail, the rise and fall of Grace's breath, the tiny movement of the twins' fists, the way Grace's arms curled protectively around them. Grace lifted her gaze. Their eyes met. For a moment the world disappeared, the walls, the machines, the past, the pain, everything faded until only the two of them remained. Grace's eyes glistened, not with anger, but with something deeper, something layered, relief, hurt, surprise, softness, all at once. "Eric," she whispered. He nearly dropped to his knees. "I'm so sorry," he breathed, voice cracking. "Grace, I drove as fast as I could. I left everything. I didn't think. I just—" His voice caught. "I'm sorry I wasn't here when they arrived." A single tear slid down his cheek. Grace exhaled softly, shifting the baby slightly so he could see them better. "You came," she said, her voice fragile from exhaustion. "That's enough right now." Those words sank into him like a blessing he didn't deserve. He stepped closer until he stood at the edge of her bed. His hands shook as he reached out, slowly, carefully, afraid to touch anything, afraid he might break the moment. "Grace," he whispered again, voice trembling. "They're ours?" She nodded. Eric's breath left him in a shattered exhale. "Can I?" he asked, his fingers hovering over the nearest blanket. Grace nodded again, shifting the baby on her left side. "This one came first," she said softly. "They're both healthy, loud, but healthy." A trembling laugh escaped her. Eric lowered his hand until his fingertips brushed the tiny hand beneath the blanket. The moment the baby's skin touched his, a small fist uncurled and wrapped around his finger. Eric's knees nearly buckled. "Oh, God," he whispered, voice breaking completely. "Hi, little one." Tears fell freely now, unchecked. Marisol and Andrea stepped quietly out of the room, giving them the moment they deserved. The door closed softly behind them. Inside, the world existed only for the four of them. Grace watched Eric as he wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, trying to gather himself. His breath came in uneven bursts. "I should have been here," he said again. "I should never have let you face this alone." Grace looked down at the babies, brushing a thumb over one soft cheek. "You're here now," she said simply, "and they need you. I do too." Those words undid him. He sat on the edge of the bed, careful not to disturb her or the twins. His hand trembled as he rested it gently over the small blankets. Grace swallowed, her voice softer now, almost trembling. "I didn't want to tell you when everything in your life was so far from me," she admitted. "I didn't want to become a burden in a world I didn't belong in anymore." His jaw clenched, regret twisting inside him. "You were never a burden," he whispered. "Never." "Grace, I should have fought harder for you. I should have listened. I should have seen what you were going through." Silence held between them, tender, honest, raw. The twins let out small, soft sounds, shifting in her arms. Eric reached out again, steadier this time, his thumb brushing over the second baby's tiny wrist. "They're perfect," he whispered. "Grace, they're perfect." A tear slid down her cheek. "I know," she said, her voice breaking with love. He looked at her again, really looked, seeing the exhaustion, the strength, the courage it took to bring them into the world without him by her side. "I'm here now," he said, his voice low but filled with conviction. "And I'm not leaving again." Grace didn't answer right away, but she didn't look away. She didn't turn from him. She didn't close off. Instead, she shifted slightly, enough to make room for him, not just at the edge of the bed, but in the moment, in the connection, in the fragile beginning of something neither of them had expected today. Eric leaned in, pressing his forehead gently against hers, careful of the babies resting between them. "I'm sorry," he whispered again. Grace's breath trembled. "I know," she said softly. "We'll talk, but not right now. Right now, let's just be here." And for the first time in months, the distance between them closed, not with words, not with promises, but with presence. Two babies sleeping, two parents breathing the same air. A love too complicated to define, but too real to ignore. The chapel had never felt this quiet. After Eric ran out the doors, Charlotte stood completely still at the center of the aisle, her bouquet lying forgotten at her feet. The jasmine-scented air that once felt serene now wrapped around her like a question she didn't know how to answer. She didn't chase after him. She didn't scream. She didn't collapse. She simply stood there, trying to understand what had just happened. The guests remained seated at first, unsure whether to leave or wait. Soft murmurs rose around her, nothing loud, nothing accusatory, but words that pressed against her like gentle taps. Did he get sick? Should someone check on him? What did he see on the phone? Is the wedding still happening? Charlotte didn't respond to any of them. Her body felt frozen, as if one wrong movement might make everything inside her crumble. A kind waiter from the reception area approached slowly, holding a small tray with a cup of tea. His voice was soft, respectful. "Miss, would you like to sit for a moment?" Charlotte blinked, then nodded faintly. She followed him to one of the pews near the side of the chapel. Her dress rustled quietly as she lowered herself onto the wooden seat, smoothing the fabric out of habit rather than intention. The waiter placed the tea gently in her hands. "Let me know if you need anything else." She offered a small, tight smile. "Thank you." He stepped away without prying. Charlotte stared down at the cup. Steam curled upward in soft ribbons. The faint herbal scent drifted across her face, anchoring her for just a moment. Her fingers trembled. She hadn't expected this. Not today. Not with Eric. She lifted the cup, sipping lightly. The warmth spread through her hands, up her arms, into her chest. But it didn't answer the questions crowding her mind. Where did he go? Why did he run? What message did he read? Her heart beat unevenly, each thump ringing louder in the empty spaces of the room. She replayed the moment at the altar. The way his expression shifted, the way the color drained from his face, the way he whispered that single word. Twins? She didn't understand it. Not fully, but the weight behind it had been unmistakable. Her breath trembled. She set the cup down gently beside her, afraid her shaking hands might spill it. Outside the chapel windows, the late afternoon sun cast soft bands of light across the pews. Dust floated in the quiet air. The world kept moving outside, but inside Charlotte felt suspended, caught between what she thought she knew and a truth she hadn't yet uncovered. She leaned forward, hands clasped between her knees, trying to steady herself enough to think clearly. She wasn't angry. Not yet. Shock had taken up too much space for anger to grow. What she felt instead was confusion. Deep, honest, human confusion. She had loved Eric, or at least she believed she did. He had always been steady, respectful, patient. Maybe not overly affectionate, but reliable. The kind of man you could build a life with. Their engagement was practical, supported by both families, celebrated by friends. Their relationship had moved at a consistent pace, never too fast, never too chaotic. But today, she realized something. She had never seen Eric look at her the way he looked when he read that message. The way his breath caught, the way his shoulders dropped, the way his world seemed to tilt. That wasn't panic. That wasn't stress. That was love. Real, raw, unfiltered love. Just not for her. She swallowed hard, her throat tightening. Her mind drifted back to small moments, times when she sensed his distance but brushed it away. The dinners where he grew quiet without explaining why. The mornings where he stared at nothing, lost inside himself. The way he sometimes hesitated before kissing her forehead, as though something in him was distracted. She had told herself it was work, pressure, stress, but now, sitting alone in a chapel that was supposed to hold the beginning of her marriage, she saw it more clearly. Part of him had never fully belonged to her. A soft gust of wind slipped through the slightly open side door, rustling the petals scattered across the aisle. Charlotte watched them move, slow drifting motions, as if the room itself was sighing. A distant church bell began to toll, low and steady. The sound echoed gently through the space. She closed her eyes. It didn't feel like morning. It felt like clarity arriving one quiet second at a time. Charlotte wasn't a woman who saw herself as fragile. She was measured, thoughtful, firm when she needed to be. She had walked away from relationships before when she sensed they weren't built on truth. She had promised herself long ago she'd never force a love that wasn't freely given. But this was different. This wasn't a breakup. This was a wedding that ended before it began. A moment meant to cement a lifetime, dissolving right in front of her. And yet, a strange peace seeped into her chest, subtle and slow. Maybe this wasn't a disaster. Maybe it was a revelation. She lifted her gaze toward the altar, where the candles still flickered gently. Their flames swayed in quiet harmony, untouched by the confusion swirling through the room. A single thought bloomed gently inside her. He didn't choose to walk away from me. He chose to run towards something he couldn't ignore. There was dignity in understanding that. There was grace in not holding a man hostage to a love he couldn't fully return. Charlotte inhaled deeply, filling her lungs with the soft jasmine-scented air that had greeted her earlier. This time it didn't sting. It felt like acceptance settling into place. When the waiter returned a few minutes later, she surprised him with a small, steady smile. "I'm okay," she said softly. "Thank you for the tea." He nodded and walked away. Charlotte reached for her bouquet on the pew beside her. The petals were slightly wilted from the fall, but still beautiful in their own way. She held them gently, letting the silence of the chapel cradle her thoughts. She wasn't sure what came next. She didn't know what story Eric had stepped into. She didn't know who Grace was, or why she mattered so deeply to him. But she knew one thing with certainty. She wanted truth more than she wanted a wedding. And she was brave enough to face whatever truth waited beyond these doors. The bells tolled again, softer this time, almost like a nudge forward. Charlotte stood slowly, gathering her skirt in one hand, bouquet in the other. As she walked toward the exit, a decision formed quietly, calmly, firmly. She would not demand Eric return. She would not cling to a love that chose another path. She would let him go, with dignity, with honesty, and with a heart still open to her own future. She pushed open the chapel doors. The sunlight met her gently, as though the world understood the weight she carried. Charlotte stepped forward, not as a woman abandoned, but as a woman awakening to her own strength. The room settled into a soft stillness after Marisol and Andrea stepped out, closing the door with a gentle click that left Eric and Grace alone with the twins. The quiet wasn't heavy. It was tender, hushed, like the air itself respected what had just unfolded. Eric sat on the edge of the bed, careful not to shake the mattress as Grace held the babies close to her chest. Their tiny breaths rose and fell against her skin, warm and rhythmic. One of them made a small sound, a soft, sleepy whimper, and Grace instinctively shifted to comfort them. Eric watched her, his heartbeat stumbling into something painful and awestruck at the same time. "Grace," he whispered, almost afraid to speak louder. "I don't know where to start." She didn't look at him immediately. Her eyes remained focused on the two newborns resting peacefully against her. Their presence gave her strength, but also a certain vulnerability she hadn't expected to feel this deeply. "You can start with the truth," she said quietly. Eric inhaled shakily. He nodded. He didn't run from this, not now. "The truth is..." He paused, pressing his palms together as if grounding himself. "I failed you. I failed them before they even arrived. I let distance grow between us because I didn't know how. To stand up to the world I lived in, I should have fought harder. I should have been there through everything." Grace finally lifted her gaze to him. There was exhaustion in her eyes, real physical exhaustion. But underneath it was something gentler, something searching. "Eric," she murmured, "I wasn't looking for perfection. I just needed honesty. I needed presence. And somewhere along the line, we lost that." He swallowed hard. "I know," he said, "and I take responsibility for all of it. Not some of it, all of it." His voice trembled. "But when I got that message today, everything in me shifted. All the things I thought mattered didn't." Grace looked down at the babies again. One of them stretched a tiny hand upward, fingers uncurling slowly like a flower meeting sunlight. Eric's breath caught. He reached out, carefully, letting his fingertip graze the soft knuckles of the newborn's hand. Almost instantly, the tiny fingers wrapped around his. The small instinctive grip sent a shock through him, powerful, emotional, humbling. He lowered his head, blinking rapidly as tears gathered. "Oh," he breathed. You're really mine." Grace's lips curved into a soft, tired smile. "They're ours," she corrected gently. Eric let out a shaky exhale, overwhelmed. He looked at Grace then, fully, deeply, as if seeing her for the first time in months. The woman who pushed through fear alone. The woman who carried twins without help. The woman he once danced with in a loft lit only by the glow of the city. The love he felt for her, the love he tried to bury, rose up like a tide he could no longer fight. "I don't expect forgiveness right away," he murmured. "But I'm here now. I'm not running. I'm not choosing convenience or expectation anymore. I'm choosing you. I'm choosing them. From this moment forward, I'm all in." Grace inhaled deeply, the weight of his words touching places in her heart she thought were closed off. She shifted slightly on the bed, holding the twins close while making room for him, a gesture small and quiet but meaningful. "Eric," she said softly, "I never wanted to shut you out, even when I felt hurt, even when everything inside me was breaking. A part of me hoped you'd come back." He bowed his head, the truth of that cutting him in ways he knew he deserved. "I'm sorry I made you face this alone," he whispered. "You deserved better." So did they. Grace stroked one of the baby's cheeks with her thumb. "You can't change the past," she said. "Neither can I, but maybe we can change what happens next." Eric lifted his eyes to meet hers. He didn't smile. He didn't rush into promises. He simply nodded, slow, steady, sincere. "I'll prove it," he said. "Every day. Whatever it takes." For a moment, the room held nothing but the sound of gentle newborn breaths and the faint hum of the heating vent. Grace leaned her head back against the pillow, her body sinking into a rare moment of calm. Then, softly, almost as if the words were rising from a place inside, her she had guarded for too long, she whispered, "Welcome home, Eric." The words struck him harder than anything she could have shouted. Home. He hadn't felt at home anywhere in years. Not in penthouses, not in boardrooms, not at his parents' gatherings, not with Charlotte, but here, in this small hospital room with Grace and two tiny beating hearts wrapped in blankets. He felt it. Eric rested his forehead gently against Grace's, careful of the babies nestled between them. His hand cupped her cheek, tender and trembling. "Thank you," he whispered, "for giving me another chance to be the man I should have been." Grace closed her eyes, leaning into his touch just slightly, enough to show she wasn't pushing him away, even if she wasn't ready to rush into his arms. The babies stirred softly, one letting out a small yawn, the other curling more tightly into Grace's warmth. Eric reached out, resting his palm lightly across both tiny blankets. The warmth of their bodies pulsed against his skin, grounding him in a way he hadn't felt since his childhood. This was real. This was happening. This was the moment everything changed. For Grace, healing didn't come instantly, but the doorway opened. For Eric, redemption wasn't complete, but the first step had been taken. And for the twins, the world began in the safest arms they could have hoped for. Their mother's warmth and their father's trembling but determined hands. The quiet room held the beginning of something new. Not perfect, not repaired overnight, but honest. A vow born not from ceremony, but from truth. A vow spoken not under stained glass windows, but in the soft glow of a hospital room. A vow of return. The room felt warmer now, the earlier tension replaced with something gentler, a soft, reflective quiet that settled over the four of them. The twins slept against Grace's chest, tiny breaths rising like the faintest rhythm of a new beginning. Eric sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders brushed lightly, but not so close that he crowded her. For the first time since everything unraveled, Grace let herself breathe deeply. The emotional storm that had followed her for months loosened its grip. Simmering beneath the exhaustion was something deeper, a thread of peace she hadn't felt in a long time. Eric watched her carefully, studying every detail of her expression. The dim hospital light softened her features, and the fatigue made her look fragile, but there was a strength in her eyes that humbled him. "I've been thinking about everything," he said quietly, his voice steady but thoughtful. "All the choices I made, all the ways I failed to show up. And the truth is, Grace, I think I forgot who I was supposed to be." She didn't respond right away. She shifted one hand to stroke the top of one twin's small head, listening with the patience she always gave generously. Eric continued, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees, hands clasped together. "You showed me what community feels like," he said. "Your family, your friends, your spirit, everything about you was grounded. When I was with you, I felt human, not a title, not a headline, just a man who could breathe." Grace felt a quiet ache bloom in her chest. He glanced over at her. "And I think part of what tore us apart was how different our worlds were. Not in a bad way, just in a real way." Grace nodded slowly. "I know," she whispered. "Loving you meant stepping into a world where people judged me before I even opened my mouth. And for you, loving me meant questioning everything you were raised to believe." She didn't say it bitterly. She said it honestly. Eric sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "I let those differences scare me. I let other people's expectations decide things I should have fought for." Grace looked at him for a moment, her expression softening. "You weren't the only one scared," she said. "I worried every day that I wasn't enough for your world, that one wrong move would send everything crashing down." Eric lifted his head sharply, eyes shining with regret. "Grace, you were always more than enough. I was the one who didn't know how to hold on." A fragile silence drifted between them, not uncomfortable, just filled with truth that needed to be acknowledged. Grace took a breath and shifted slightly to face him more fully. "Love isn't always simple," she said. "Especially not when you're trying to build a future across different cultures, different expectations, different social circles. But none of that means it can't work. It just means both people have to fight for it." Eric nodded slowly, absorbing every word. She added quietly, "Loving someone who doesn't come from your world requires humility, curiosity, respect, and courage." "A lot of courage." Eric bowed his head. "Which I didn't have. Not back then," she corrected gently. "But today, you came running. Not because it was easy, not because people expected it, but because you wanted to do the right thing." Eric's jaw tightened at the memory. "I should have come sooner." Grace let out a slow exhale. Sometimes lessons come late. But late doesn't mean useless. He lifted his eyes toward her, grateful for the grace she didn't have to give. She continued, her voice soft but firm. "Forgiveness doesn't erase what happened. It doesn't make the loneliness disappear, but it does allow us to see what can grow from the pain instead of only what was lost." Eric's chest tightened as he watched her. "You really believe we can grow from this?" Grace lowered her gaze to the babies lying peacefully against her. She traced the curve of one tiny ear, then said quietly, "They are the proof." Eric looked at them, two small lives curled into the safety of their mother's arms, and felt his heart twist in a way he'd never experienced. "These babies are going to grow up seeing two worlds," Grace whispered. "Mine, with community, laughter, porch conversations, backyard reunions, faith, and yours, with resources, opportunity, structure, and access to things I never dreamed of." Eric swallowed, imagining it. "If we do this right," she said softly, "they won't see division. They'll see richness, wholeness, a blend of two cultures that can teach them strength and kindness. Her voice thinned slightly with emotion. They'll know where they come from, both sides, both truths. Eric's eyes burned. Grace looked at him again, her tone calmer now. And they'll know forgiveness is strength, not weakness. Eric leaned closer without even realizing it. Grace, thank you for saying that, for teaching that, for living it. She smiled faintly, tired but genuine. He continued, I want to raise them to understand where they come from, the good, the complicated, the beautiful, all of it. And I want them to know they are loved, not because they fit into one world or the other, but because they belong. Grace nodded slowly. That's all I ever wanted. Eric hesitated, then spoke with quiet sincerity. I also want to be accountable, not just present, not just financially supportive. Accountable. I want to show up for midnight feedings, doctor appointments, school conferences, everything. I want to be a father, not a visitor. Grace's eyes softened at that. She studied him, sensing the sincerity in his posture, in the tremble of his breath, in the way he looked at the twins as if they were the first real thing he had touched in years. You don't have to prove everything today, she said gently. But the fact that you're here, that's a start. Eric nodded, releasing a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. Grace settled back against the pillows, the twins now shifting in small, sleepy movements. The dim light reflected across their tiny faces, and Grace smiled with a warmth that melted the last of Eric's defenses. You know, she said softly, life doesn't always follow the plan we think we're supposed to have. He laughed quietly, a tired, grateful laugh. That's the understatement of the year. Grace continued, voice slowing as fatigue returned. Sometimes the hard moments force us to grow into people we didn't know we could be. Eric nodded. He felt that, deeply. She let out a soft breath. Love doesn't need to look perfect. It just needs to be true. Eric reached out and gently touched her arm, a small gesture seeking permission, connection, understanding. Grace didn't pull away. The room fell into a quiet harmony, her steady breathing, the twins' tiny sighs, and Eric's newfound stillness. It felt like a lesson in real time, in humility, in love, in growth, in forgiveness, in identity, in responsibility, in community, lessons that would shape the family forming right here, in this calm, dimly lit hospital room. The nurses dimmed the lights as the evening settled outside, turning the hospital room into a warm cocoon of soft shadows and gentle hums. Grace had drifted halfway into sleep, the twins resting peacefully in their bassinets beside the bed. Their tiny chests rose and fell with a rhythm so delicate that Eric found himself unable to look away. He stood by the window, one hand on the ledge, watching the Georgia sunset stretch across the sky in streaks of gold and fading rose. The city outside moved as it always had, cars passing, lights flickering on one by one. But in this room, time moved differently, slower, more intentional, as if the world respected the shift taking place inside him. At some point, Grace stirred, her voice soft and sleepy. Eric, are you all right? He turned, the sunset's glow resting against his face and softening the tired lines around his eyes. Yeah, he whispered, just taking it in. Grace adjusted on the bed, wincing slightly from the lingering ache of labor. She reached for the rail with one hand, steadying herself as she sat up. Her gaze flicked from Eric to the twins, then back to him again. You can hold them again if you want, she said gently. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he walked over to the bassinets slowly, like a man approaching something sacred. He slipped his hands beneath the first baby, the quieter of the two, and lifted them carefully against his chest. The tiny head nuzzled into his shirt, as if instinctively recognizing a connection he was only beginning to understand. Grace watched him, her eyes softening. You're good with them, she murmured. Eric let out a breath that was half laugh, half disbelief. I don't know what I'm doing, he admitted, but I know I want to learn. He shifted closer to the bed and sat beside her, still holding the baby securely. Grace reached across to rest her fingers lightly on the infant's back, her touch feather soft. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The room held a stillness so intimate that breathing itself felt like something shared. Eric looked at Grace, really looked, seeing not just the woman he once loved, but the mother of his children. A woman who held strength in the quietest parts of herself. You know, he started, his voice thoughtful, at the chapel today, when everything froze, I thought my life was falling apart. He paused, brushing the baby's cheek with one finger. But sitting here now, it feels like something is finally coming together. Grace let out a soft hum of agreement. She leaned her head back against the pillow, her body relaxing as the moment enveloped her. "There's something peaceful about this," she whispered. "Like the world outside can wait." Eric glanced toward the second bassinet, where the other baby shifted in a tiny stretch. "May I?" he asked softly. Grace nodded. Eric gently placed the first baby back in the bassinet and picked up the second, the more vocal one, who let out a small protesting sound before settling against his chest. Eric smiled at that, rocking gently while humming under his breath. It wasn't a tune he thought about. It simply came from a place inside him he hadn't tapped into in years. Grace watched him, her expression warm. "You're a natural," she said quietly. He shook his head. "No, I'm trying. But I'm going to get better." Grace did not argue. She didn't need to. His intention filled the room more clearly than any speech could have. Outside, the last edge of sunlight dipped below the horizon, painting the window in deep amber. Eric's gaze drifted toward the night sky, then back to the woman beside him. "I kept something with me today," he said suddenly. Grace tilted her head. "What do you mean?" Eric reached into his pocket slowly, not with urgency, not with guilt, but with reflection. He pulled out the wedding ring he had carried down the aisle only hours before. It rested in his palm, cool and gleaming in the dim light. Grace inhaled softly, eyes widening with surprise. He didn't move closer. He didn't push it toward her. He simply looked at it, then at her, with a clarity that felt like truth blooming inside him. "This ring was supposed to symbolize a promise," he said, "a future. But standing at that altar today, I realized something." Grace waited, silent and steady, letting him speak without pressure. "I realized I was about to make a vow without my whole heart." His voice lowered. "Because the part of my heart I needed the most was here, not at that church, not in that ceremony. Here, with you, with them." Grace blinked, her tears rising slowly, but not falling yet. Eric closed his hand around the ring, then opened it again, letting the metal catch the dim light. "I don't know where we go from here. I don't want to rush you or pretend the past didn't hurt. But I do know this." He exhaled deeply, voice growing steadier. "I don't want a promise made in front of a crowd. I want a promise made in truth, in love, in growth, and in patience." Grace lowered her gaze to the babies, who lay peacefully now, wrapped in the soft glow of the room. The quiet between them thickened, not with tension, but with meaning. She placed her hand on Eric's wrist, gently. "I'm not asking for anything tonight," she whispered. "Not decisions, not labels, not plans, but I am willing to start again, slowly, carefully, honestly." Eric looked at her, gratitude flooding through him in a way he couldn't hide. Grace continued softly. "Right now, this is enough. You're here, you're showing up. That's what matters." Eric nodded, swallowing hard. "I won't let you down again." One of the twins let out a tiny squeak, as if punctuating his promise. Grace and Eric both laughed, a soft, worn-out laugh that carried relief and hope in equal measure. As the room grew darker, the hallway lights cast a warm tint through the window. Eric shifted closer, and Grace leaned gently into his shoulder, her body finally relaxing after hours of intensity. They sat like that for a long while, quiet, calm, a family of four learning how to breathe together for the first time. Eric gazed down at the twins, then at Grace, then at the ring in his hand. He turned it over slowly before setting it quietly on the bedside table. Its meaning had changed. Its purpose had shifted. This time, if a vow came, it would not be rushed. It would not be shaped by expectation. It would grow from a place of healing, a place of truth, a place of shared responsibility. Grace closed her eyes, resting her head fully against him now. "You know," she murmured, "sometimes the past breaks us, only to return and rebuild us stronger." Eric let the words settle inside him, a final lesson for the night. He tightened his arm gently around her shoulders, pressing a soft kiss to the top of her head. "Yes," he whispered, "stronger than before." The twins slept. Grace exhaled softly. Eric held them all with newfound purpose. The beginning of a new story had unfolded, quiet, unforced, honest. A family of four. If this story touched you, share it with someone who may need a reminder that life can always turn around.